The sun hung low over Brookstone Estates, a peaceful place in Columbus, Ohio. The homes stood tall and proud, the lawns lush and neat, the driveways smooth and shiny. The quietness felt almost too much, only interrupted by the occasional bark of a dog or the rumble of a luxury car passing by. Everything seemed perfect, just the way it was meant to be. 16-year-old Elijah Brooks. His body tired from a hard basketball practice at Franklin High, adjusted the strap of his gym bag. His music played loud in his ears, drowning out the sounds around him. After a long day of classes and drills, he felt the exhaustion in his limbs. Usually, he would walk through the bushes to get home. But today he decided to pass through Brookstone Estates. He wasn't a stranger to this neighborhood. His best friend lived just a few blocks away. But as he walked, he knew that people here wouldn't expect to see someone like him walking alone inside one of the homes. Behind a large bay window, Linda Cartwright watched him. She had lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. She knew every person, every car, and every movement on the streets. But today, something felt off. A young boy, tall, black, and athletic, walking alone with a bag on his shoulder. She felt a tug of worry. Or was it something else? Her hand reached for her phone, then paused. Maybe he was just passing through, she thought. Maybe there was a reason he was here. But doubt crept in, quiet and fast. What if he was up to something? What if she ignored it? And later on, heard about a break in a few houses down. The pit in her stomach grew. Better safe than sorry, she decided. Linda took a deep breath and dialed 911. Yes. I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood. But Linda didn't know that Elijah wasn't just any teenager. And she certainly didn't know who his mother was. Her eyes never left Elijah as she spoke to the dispatcher, her fingers tight around the phone. He's walking down my street, looking around like he's scoping out houses. I don't know who he is. He's got a bag. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Can you describe him? Linda's lips tightened. He's tall, black, wearing a hoodie and gym shorts. He has a bag. I don't know. It just doesn't look right. The dispatcher asked if the young man was doing anything illegal. Linda hesitated. Well, no, not exactly. But I've never seen him before. This is a quiet neighborhood. That was enough for the dispatcher. They assured her that officers would be sent out to check on it. Linda hung up, still watching Elijah as he paused for a moment to change his playlist. He had no idea what was coming. A few streets away, Officers Bennett and Rodriguez sat in their squad car. The call came through. A possible prowler in Brookstone Estates. A black male, mid-teens, carrying a bag. Bennett, a stocky officer with 15 years on the force, glanced over at Rodriguez, the younger officer still learning the ropes. Let's check it out, Bennett said. The squad car's lights flashed on, and they sped toward the neighborhood. Elijah was just 2 blocks from home when he heard it, the sharp whoop of a siren behind him. He turned, confused, and before he could react, the squad car pulled up fast. The doors flung open. Hey! Stop right there, one of the officers shouted. Elijah froze, pulling the headphones from his ears. 2 officers stepped out, hands near their holsters. What's in the bag? Officer Bennett demanded. Elijah blinked. My basketball gear. Where are you headed? Bennett asked. Home, Elijah replied, his voice steady, though his chest tightened. He knew this wasn't just a random stop. Rodriguez stepped closer. You live here? Yes, sir, Elijah said. A few blocks over. Bennett scoffed. Right. What's the address? Elijah started to answer. But before he could, Rodriguez grabbed the bag. Hey, that's my stuff, Elijah said, pulling back. Relax, Bennett muttered, unzipping the bag and rifling through it. Sneakers, a sweaty jersey, a water bottle, nothing suspicious. But Bennett wasn't done yet. Why'd you cut through this neighborhood? He asked. His voice sharp. Elijah's heart raced. And he knew this moment would weigh on him for a long time. It's just a shortcut, Elijah said, his voice uncertain, feeling the weight of the moment. Rodriguez watched Bennett, unsure. Was he telling the truth? Bennett stood still, firm in his stance, and didn't waver. Then why did someone call the law on him? Elijah wanted to ask, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't finish them as his gaze shifted. He noticed something behind the officers, something dark. A big black vehicle rolling toward them. It came to a stop with a sharp breath of air. And the doors opened. From it stepped Denise Brooks, the mayor of Columbus, but the officers did not know who they had stopped. Neither did Linda. The air shifted the moment Denise stepped out of that black SUV. She was not just any mother. She was the mayor of Columbus, and she carried herself like the wind that sweeps across the plains, strong, steady, and unyielding. She wore a sharp navy blazer and heels that clicked against the earth with purpose. Every step spoke of someone who walked into rooms where others doubted her, only to remind him of her strength, her authority. Her eyes, sharp and focused, locked on the two officers standing over her son. Bennett felt his spine stiffen, just as he had seen on the news at city meetings. But now, in this moment, he could barely catch his breath. Rodriguez was the first to speak. "Mom, I need you to step back. We are handling the situation." Denise didn't flinch. She stood tall, unshaken. "Oh, I see that," she said, her voice as smooth as the river yet sharp enough to cut through stone. "And what exactly is the situation?" Elijah, sensing the shift, exhaled. Relief began to wash over him. His mother had arrived. She held up her hand, silent, but clear. "I've got this." Bennett swallowed, gathering his thoughts. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area." Denise's brow furrowed, one eyebrow rising. "Suspicious?" Rodriguez gestured toward Elijah. "We stopped him to ask some questions. We need to confirm if he lives here." Denise exhaled slowly, her breath measured, as if holding the wind back. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen. With the same stillness, she held it up. On the screen was Elijah's student ID, their address, and a picture of the two of them at a community gathering just last month. Silence fell over the gathering. The officers shifted their feet uncomfortably. Bennett's jaw tightened. But Denise was not finished. "So tell me," she began, her voice still even. "Did you stop him because he was suspicious? Or did you stop him because someone assumed he didn't belong?" Neither officer spoke. Their mouths closed tight, holding no answer behind them. Linda stood frozen at her doorway, watching it all unfold. The realization hit her hard. She had made the call. She had called the law on the mayor's son. She had called the law on a boy just walking home. Now, she was witnessing a mother, one of the most powerful women in the city, standing tall and demanding answers. And the officers had none. Denise moved forward slowly, as though the earth itself was moving with her. She stepped closer to the officers, her eyes never leaving them. The air seemed heavier now, as if the very sky held its breath in waiting. Denise didn't shout. She didn't curse. She didn't need to. Her voice, when it came, was calm and steady, as though she was speaking to the wind itself. "You searched his bag. You questioned where he lived. You assumed he didn't belong." Bennett squared his shoulders. "We were just following procedure," Rodriguez said, but his voice cracked slightly. Denise tilted her head, as if she was studying the way the world moved around her. "Procedure," she repeated. Rodriguez shifted, uncomfortable under her gaze. "We got a call about a suspicious person," he muttered. Denise took another step, closing the space between them. A teenage boy, walking home. There was no answer to that. The officers had no words. Elijah rubbed his hands together. the sting of being treated as a suspect still fresh. His neighborhood was his home. Yet they had made him feel like an outsider. A shadow passed over his heart. Denise turned, her gaze finally locking with Linda, who was still frozen in her doorway. "Was it you?" Denise asked. Linda's mouth opened, but the words did not come. She felt the weight of the moment settle around her like the heavy sky before a storm. She hadn't meant for this. She hadn't thought it would go this far. She told herself she wasn't racist, that she was just being cautious. But now, she was standing before a mother, a leader, who had to leave her work, rush into her own neighborhood, and defend her son from the law over nothing. Linda's face flushed red. She swallowed hard. I just, she began. But the words hung heavy in the air, unwilling to come out. Denise watched her son Elijah, her gaze steady. Linda stood nearby, silent, but her thoughts were racing. She had no answer that could make sense of what was happening without sounding like she was siding with the very people who she never wanted to believe were the enemy. Elijah, a young man with a future, had been treated like a criminal because of the way he looked, and the presence of a gym bag he'd been carrying after basketball practice. Linda's eyes dropped. She knew the truth, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. The officers knew it too. But instead of an apology, Officer Bennett simply shifted his weight, his tone indifferent. "If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way." Denise's exhale was sharp, filled with the weight of years of pain. That was it. She turned back to her son, her hand reaching out to him. "Come on, baby, let's go home." Elijah grabbed his bag and walked to the SUV. As they drove off, the officers muttered among themselves, oblivious to the true damage they had done. Linda stood there, arms wrapped around herself, still processing what had just happened. She hadn't expected this to unfold. Not like this, not in her own neighborhood. But the reality was clear. For Elijah, for Denise, for every black family that had ever had to fight for the right to exist where they belonged. This wasn't over. The ride home was filled with silence. Elijah stared out of the window, replaying the incident, the flashing lights, the way they searched his bag as if he were a criminal. The cold looks from the officers who saw him as less than human. Denise gripped the wheel tighter, trying to steady herself, knowing that this was inevitable, but still wishing it hadn't come so soon. Finally, after a few minutes, Denise broke the silence. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Elijah exhaled slowly. "I don't know." He shook his head. Denise nodded, understanding. She didn't have an answer either, not the one he needed. "I get it," she whispered. Then Elijah asked, his voice quieter than before, "What would have happened if you weren't there?" Denise's stomach twisted, her heart aching. She didn't have an answer for that either. So instead, she reached over and squeezed his hand. "You did everything right." Elijah sighed, frustrated. "And it still didn't matter." Denise looked at him, really looked at him, her 16-year-old son, still carrying the weight of the day's injustice. She saw the sweat from basketball practice, the tiredness in his eyes, but also the heavy burden he now carried, one he should never have had to carry. She knew it wasn't just about today. It wasn't just about this single moment. It was about every single story like Elijah's, every child like him, every parent like her, having to teach their children how to move through a world that often sees them as a threat before they are seen as human. And then across town, Linda sat in her living room, staring at the phone in her hands, the same phone that had dialed 911. The same phone that might have been the reason Elijah never made it home. Her stomach churned as she realized her mistake. She thought she was being cautious, protecting her neighborhood, but now she saw the truth. She hadn't been cautious, she had been afraid. And for the first time, she asked herself, afraid of what her eyes fixed on the screen of the phone as she finally asked the question she had avoided her whole life. What if the danger wasn't him? What if it was her? Now, ask yourself, how many times has a call like this ended differently? How many stories like Elijah's don't have a parent show up just in time? How many times do people like Linda walk away, never thinking about it again? This isn't just a story about one afternoon in one neighborhood. It's a reality that happens every day. Maybe it's time we stop pretending we don't see it. Maybe it's time we do something about it. If this story made you think, even for just a second, share it, talk about it, learn from it, because the next time someone like Linda picks up the phone, the person on the other end might not be as lucky as Elijah.